just let me go over the thing. You remember what we said about the culture, all right? This is a way of life that we create. That we create. God does not create. And that's why when Edith said she's taking really a long look at her responsibility with a Christian understanding of providence as opposed to fatalism, as opposed to predestination, God's providence can only unfold through our decisions. Now that's a theological principle that you want to take and write down and inscribe and put it on your mirror in your bathroom when you get up in the morning and you look at it. God's providence only unfolds in the world through our choices and decisions. God's plan, in other words, is in our hands. And that plan can only unfold in our way of life, the life that we develop and construct. Okay? Then you have all those other aspects of culture that I talked about. We talked about identity. Yes?
Father, by choices and decisions is made free will.
It's correct. Yeah. And then we get into the whole theological question about the relationship of freedom, free will, and grace. And if you see these two as forces over against each other, then you're in trouble. But when you see that grace, which is love, is the only thing that can draw our freedom. Love is the only thing that draws our freedom. When you fall in love, you freely go to the beloved. Nobody's forcing you. Nobody's manipulating you. You are drawn to the good. It's another theological principle. Yes?
Can we add actions? Our choices, decisions?
Yeah, actions. Absolutely.
Think about creating.
That's right. I presume that the choices were going to lead to actions, but you're right. We conclude that. The actual action, okay? And that's this identity, which is, you're saying, who you are, involves all of these other aspects: vocation, ideology, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, nationality. All of these things help compose that. But the major struggle, the two elements in the identity process, are the boundaries and the adaptation. When you don't adapt, you die. When you are so rigid, you crack. When you are so adaptive, you become a glob. And you just sit there and you ooze all over the place and nobody can control anything. Okay? And then we gave you those 4 categories of identity: diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement. I know those were a lot of things to take down yesterday, so I figured I'd put them on the paper for you. And then that identity is always relational. Okay? We're constantly negotiating boundaries and border crossings. All right, and then finally the Catholic vision. And my team told me last night that I should really go back to this question of the magisterium and the ministerium and make this very clear to you. When I talk about the magisterium, I am talking about a teaching office in the church. I'm not talking about specific people. It's embodied in specific people, but it's an aspect, it is an office, it is a service within the church to the entire community. And the way it's best carried out is ministerium. Mini is small. Service. Magis means teacher, great. I'm distinguishing this from hierarchy and laity. Because sometimes the hierarchy, I mean, if we read church history, the hierarchy hasn't been too nice sometimes. I mean, there were even some popes who weren't very nice. In fact, there are some popes who were very corrupt. All you have to do is go back to the 16th century, 1400s, 1490, 1495. Look at Calixtus III. Look at Alexander the Sixth. Look at Sixtus the Fifth. Aren't you impressed that I know all this? Those are the ones that I've spent most time on. I wanted to see what they were doing, you see? So you go back and you look at the ups and downs. The church is semper reformanda, must constantly be renewed. The church is as human, and it is as much affected in its humanity by sin as any other people in the world. So when people say to me, why should I go to church with those hypocrites on Sunday? I say, because you're a member of the crowd. Join them. Come in. Let's all look at the hypocrisy that's going on. Every one of us with our little hidden lives at some point as part of our identity. And we keep trying to put on the good face and the mask. And what does that do to our identity? Not accepting that dimension of ourselves. So, basically, however, go back to Roy's point over here. We are dealing with mystery. And mystery alone brings awe. Not like kids say today, it's awesome. No. I'm talking about standing in New Mexico at night, looking up at the sky and watching the universes. And watching the fireworks of meteors flashing back and forth before your eyes. I'm talking about the awe that comes in watching a baby be born. I'm talking about the awe which is related to each individual person's life unfolding before your eyes, which is sacred. And I'm talking about the awe which makes you stand there and see a God who is so transcendent that none of our words can capture ultimately the mystery. All we can do is say what God is not. And the only affirmation of the identity of God is love. Okay? All right.
And it's such a shame that in our world today, people don't stop and behold. That's what's missing.
We're going to come. We're going to come. They don't even behold themselves. They don't even behold their own identity. They're too busy running around. Busyness, I told you, was one of the greatest enemies. All right. And now what happens, Maureen? Do I go on? All right, I can go on. What I thought was the best way of moving into this question of identity is to do a little reflection on happiness. Okay? Why did I choose happiness? Well, there are a couple reasons. One of which is this. If you tell me what makes you happy, it already tells me about something about how you perceive yourself. If you tell me what makes you happy, it tells me something about your identity. My mother used to say to me, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. These are all those basic, this is the basic formation that we receive in a family, from a mother, from a parent. Okay? It's where the basic formation takes place. It's where the groundwork is laid for your identity. And then the second thing she told me, and I hated this, and she says, your friends will make you cry. well, she's nuts. My friends are going to make me cry. And I had to learn that lesson, because the people who make you cry are probably the only people telling you the truth. And when they tell you the truth, it's not always nice. But you're getting a perception of who you are through their eyes. And it emphasizes once again that identity is relational. It is relational. So let's talk a little bit about happiness, and we're going to move into it and find out why I have chosen this as a way to enter into testing where we are with our identity. In the Greek world, for instance, there were 4 perceptions of happiness, 4 schools in Athens. And we go back to the Greeks because Greece is the cradle of Western civilization. I'm not going into Eastern civilization. We'll leave that to Father Ben if he wants to talk to you about happiness in the Asian world with the Confucians, not the Confucians, the Confucians, not Confucians, but Confucians, and the Buddhists and the Taoists and all those kinds of things. That's another way. But we have been affected by the West, all right? First of all, there's one school of the Greeks which says happiness is objective rather than subjective. And this objective happiness is not to be measured in moments, but in a whole lifetime. Your happiness is going to come afterwards, to the extent that you have lived the role which has been forecast and predestined for you by the gods. When you come to that moment at the end of your life, if you've lived your role as Achilles, if you've lived your role as Ulysses, if you lived your role as Agamemnon, when you come to that moment, you will have fulfilled the role determined for you by the gods. All right? That sounds something like alphas, betas, gammas, and deltas, and sigmas. All right? The second way of looking at happiness is happiness was virtue's compensation. In other words, happiness is going to come from a well-balanced soul. Okay? The third thing was pleasures might accompany happiness, but not necessarily so. In other words, pleasure is not inherent in being happy. And fourthly, happiness requires discipline and hard work. It's a craft that you learn. And the hand of the craft is reason. Reason is going to determine what is going to make you happy. Now, we'll make a little jump here now, okay? We're going to jump over. Well, let me talk to you a little bit about the Romans. This is interesting. Roman felicitas, happiness, felicitas. Felicitas has to do with sex. Sex was the means to happiness. In fact, if you go to Pompeii, many of you been to Pompeii? You've been to Pompeii, okay, you were there, Aaron. Did you notice a bakery there? Did they point out a bakery to you? There's a bakery, what was an old bakery, and on the bakery, what you have carved into the stone is a penis and testicles. Okay? Now, the penis and testicles are representative of happiness for the Roman. And they said, come to this bakery and you are going to watch this flour rise just as much as you would have in the sexual act, which will bring about children. Okay? So this is going to be, the yeast in this flour is going to make it rise. This is the best bread in town. Okay? It's also interesting that in our first Eucharistic prayer, which we don't say too often, but when you get down to the saints, and when it talks about the martyrs, 2 martyrs are recalled in there. Perpetua et felicitas. Oh, we're talking about perpetual happiness, all right? Perpetual happiness in this? Well, it so happens that in the year 205, Perpetua was a woman who was in the process of becoming a Christian. She was a catechumen, and she was told that she had to worship the gods of the Romans. The god of the Romans, which was on a Roman coin, which was Felicitas. Okay, this is Felicitas of the Roman state, the Roman Empire. She would not, and therefore she was taken to her martyrdom and put to the lions. But not only she was taken, but her servant girl who was pregnant and called Felicitas was taken with her. It's just the opposite of what the Romans held as far as happiness was concerned. Happiness was seen by these people in worshiping the true God, the God which was beyond all of this. And I don't know whether you've all looked at it. Have you seen the series Rome on television? I happened to check in on it, and I watched it very avidly. When you watch what the Roman Empire was really like and the way people were living, you then wake up and understand what Christianity brought to the transformation of that Roman world. An unbelievable, realistic portrayal of the quality of life and the culture in Rome. And it's interesting because it was such a flip side of this culture, which was brought by Perpetua Felicitas, as over opposed to the happiness that Romans looked at, that it took Rome and turned it around. Roma becomes amor. Roma, the name of the empire, becomes amor, which is love. A-M-O-R. Amor. And it flipped it on its head. What did the Old Testament consider to be happiness? In the Old Testament, Makarios, which is the Greek word in the Septuagint, was taken from a basic word, Y-S-R. It's the consonants of the Hebrew word, which means to be upright, to be just. Asher was the word, A-S-H-E-R. And it implies happiness in the journey and happiness in the arrival. And one of the books where you find this contained most is one that we just read in the liturgical cycle for the year, for the Mass, and that's in the book of Tobit. Tobit is about a journey, and Tobit is about an arrival. Tobit is about the journey into love and a love relationship, and it's about the arrival in the marital relationship between Tobit and Sarah. And as they prayed, as they entered into this union, which was a covenant, okay? So it is here. It's about the bounty of the final destination. It's about justice. It is about peace of the covenant and keeping the law of the Lord, the Torah, okay? It's also about material things because the journey always promised going into the land of milk and honey. That's where you're going to go. This is where the Lord is leading, into a land of milk and honey. When we come to the New Testament, happiness is to be found in living sacrificial love, the sacrificial love of Jesus himself. It is union with all humankind, with the world, and with God who is love. It is achieved both here and hereafter. This is important because we're going to see what happens to this. And it is here in faith and in hope and in love, and it is in hereafter in total union with God. That's why Jesus can say, how blessed, how happy are the poor in spirit, how happy are those who thirst after justice, how happy those who seek mercy, how happy the compassionate, how happy the meek, how happy those who are willing to undergo persecution out of love for me. This happiness begun now and coming to greater and greater fulfillment as we go through the journey. All right, we're going to make a leap. We go up to the Enlightenment. So what did the Enlightenment do? And the Enlightenment came out of Christian roots, all right? And the Enlightenment wanted to focus on a specific aspect of human life and human dignity. In about 1450, a man whose name was Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, I love to say that to you to impress you, was a Florentine, and he wanted to, he wrote a work which was called De Dignitate Hominis, on the dignity of the human person. And what he was doing in there, he just took the Christian message and he focused on the wonderful dimension of the dignity of the human person, particularly with human freedom and the ability to give direction to one's life and to create life. It's very appealing to Americans. And actually, some of the existential, phenomenological philosophers and psychologists in this country go back to that document which he used, and he took to Rome, and he defended that thesis in Rome before the Pope and the cardinals. Okay? So it's on the dignity of the human person. It's not very long, but it's a wonderful document that you may want to go back and look at. So what did the Enlightenment do? The Enlightenment came out of that. And the Enlightenment wanted to focus on the dignity of the human person, particularly in the power of reason. They go back to the Greeks, okay? And they said that happiness is something that all could aspire to in this life. Now, the reason that they were focusing on this life is because we had come out of the 14th century and the beginnings of the 15th century, in which people had moved out of the Black Plague and saw gloom and doom, and the only thing they saw at that point, even as Christians, was the only place we're going to be happy is with God. It's only going to be out of this world. You know how we talk about pie in the sky, Christians? Nothing here, everything there. So you're constantly having to shift in this balance between here and there. We don't have to wait until the next world. It's a natural human endowment. Happiness is a natural human endowment attainable in theory for every man, woman, and child in this life. Where people are unhappy, it's because of wrong beliefs, wrong thinking, wrong forms of government, wrong forms of living conditions, or wrong customs. So if we get rid of all of those wrong things, we can make everything right and we will be happy. Change these and you can have happiness. Happiness is less an ideal godlikeness than a self-evident truth to be pursued and attained here and now. Okay? So what we're taking a little journey through history to see how people's understanding of happiness shifted, and it's always related to how they perceive themselves. It's always. For the Greeks, it's up here in the head. Okay? For the Greeks, they saw themselves as being manipulated by the gods. They didn't have any control over that. They just had to live their role. Okay? So you come down to the dignity of the human person with Pico della Mirandola, and he's saying, no, 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 we have freedom. This is God-given grace here. We can do something about this. We take our decisions and our actions, and we can create happiness. All right? And then we come to the Enlightenment, and they say, look, don't worry about that world over there. That's secondary. What you have to do is here. You have to understand what's wrong with the situation and correct it, and you can make your happiness. All right? What about the post-Enlightenment world? In this outlook, the world is given to humankind. No, the world is to give to humankind all that it would make it happy. The post-Enlightenment world is the world of entitlements. I am entitled to be happy. So there's a move towards entitlement, rights, and privileges. Now we're beginning to hear some terminology that we're familiar with. Okay? There's a refusal to accept natural limits and boundaries of human achievement. Hubris, pride, says that there are no longer limits that can separate the sacred and the profane. All is profane and all is secular, and all can be manipulated by human intelligence and will be created, and human intelligence and will to create happiness that meets all of our desires. So we have it within our power. Reason and will, we can create situations which are going to respond to all of our desires. Now, this is a theory of government which says we should leave government in the hands of technicians and the specialists. You know, don't bother us with mere politicians. Just put the government in the hands of people who are sociologists, anthropologists, engineers, chemists, biologists, etc., and we can straighten out the whole thing. Does it sound like something you read? Uh-huh. All right. So, when we look at the various kinds of happiness, happiness either can be virtue or reason, or consist in truth and the good, or pleasure satisfied, or a life of sacrifice, or here, or hereafter, or here and hereafter. Okay? And then I have 3 questions. Might not the search for happiness entail its own undoing? Might not the search for happiness entail its own undoing? Does not our modern commandment to be happy produce its own form of discontent? Freud wrote a book, Civilization and Its Discontent, didn't he, Dr. Moore? He was going after this kind of subject himself. And does it not delude us regarding who we are and what we are when we focus on this? And of course, you all know it's been burned into your memory, and it's a principle on which you stand. And it says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, when Jefferson put his draft together, the founding fathers were all there scrutinizing every word. The only phrase that was not disputed was the pursuit of happiness. Nobody questioned him on that. And yet it meant several things to different people who were in that room. You know. So, and our Constitution tells us that our government is formed to assist people in seeking security or safety and happiness. All right. John Locke, whom Jefferson knew inside and out, said that we have to seek life, liberty, and estate. No, he didn't use the word property. He used the word estate. But it slipped over into property. There were other philosophers who used property and it became identified. The exact quote is life, liberty, and estate. But he means property. He's right. He means property. So already we have a shift here, right? Where is the focus for this happiness going to be? By the way, this formulation of happiness, life, liberty, and property survived in many state constitutions. It's in Pennsylvania, it's in Virginia, it's in Vermont, it's in Massachusetts, and it's in New Hampshire. And some of the other states have nuances on this same thing. So let's play with the word pursuit. What did pursuit mean in those days, and what does it mean now? Well, in the 18th century, it had a harder meaning than it does today. Its close cognates at that time were prosecute and persecute. Okay, pursuit, prosecute, and persecute. And in fact, in Benjamin Johnson's, in Dr. Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language, it says to pursue, to chase, to follow in hostility. Pursue, the act of following with hostile intention. So you're going out there now and you're really going to hunt this down. You are the hunter hunting for happiness, and you're going to go with this aggressiveness to be able to conquer it and have it for yourself. So pursuing happiness is like pursuing a fugitive. And what happens is pursuit focuses on the fact that it's an endless human struggle. Now see where this is leading us with regard to understanding ourselves. It's an endless human struggle to secure pleasure, wants, desires, in a constant state of uneasiness. And John Locke focuses on this uneasiness when he talks about the pursuit of happiness. Think about another word for uneasiness. Fear. The word that's related to begins with A. Anxiety. Anxiety. Look at this. You're going to pursue happiness. You are told you have the right to pursue happiness. And you're going after it. Man, you're on your horse. You're out there looking for this. You're going like the hunter. You're going to pursue this beast that you want to conquer. And all the time you're anxious. And all the time you're uneasy. And all your time you're saying to yourself, but I satisfied that pleasure, but another one has been created over here, and another desire is over there, and another want is over here, and now which way is my horse going to go? Says something to us about how we perceive ourselves, doesn't it?
Excuse me, Father.
Yes.
When you were saying that, the one thing that came into my mind as far as the American advancement toward the West was the concept of manifest destiny.
Exactly correct. Beautiful. We're going to be talking about that in a minute when I flash something up here on my second part of my presentation. But you people anticipate. I mean, you're really with this thing. You're moving with it. Listen what Alexis de Tocqueville says. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote his book in 1830 to 1835. It's called Democracy in America. It's 2 volumes. This man was a genius. And by the way, what people don't understand is that he was a Catholic Christian, okay? Frenchman. Came to this country, and what he wanted to do was, about 50 years after the founding of the Republic, he wanted to go and look up to see how this Republic was functioning. So he went around and he visited prisons, and he went to different courts to see how the court system worked. He observed our country. He observed family life. He observed all the aspects that you would find in any given way of life, which is the culture, okay? He had the incisiveness of a Cartesian. He would slice right through what he saw and come to conclusions that today we are seeing unfolding before our eyes in an incredible way. It's worth just doing a course on the 2 volumes of his Democracy in America because, I mean, it's just so insightful. This is what he says. In America, I have seen the freest and best educated men in circumstances the happiest to be found in the world. And yet, it seems to me that a cloud habitually hung on their brow, and they seemed serious and almost sad even in their pleasures. Think about it. They're having all of their pleasures satisfied, and yet they have this big frown on their face. The chief reason for this is that the former do not give a moment's thought to the toils they endure, whereas the latter never stop thinking of the good things they have not got. That's not following on that. It's following from another quotation, which I eliminated by mistake. Okay. But what he's talking about is the situation in Europe where you can go into these poor towns and people are subject to the nobles and so forth. And he says the chief reason that they're happy is because these foremen don't give a moment's thought to the toils they endure. They don't even focus on that. Whereas the latter never stop thinking of the good things they do not have in this country. Okay? On the whole, Tocqueville was inclined to welcome the changes that America augured for the future. What did America augur? Greater opportunity and social mobility, expansion of democracy and civic participation, increased commercial activity, industry, and trade. These are all positive things. All positive things. And yet he still saw these people in the midst of all of these things that they had with this cloud on their brow and the uneasiness that John Locke talked about. Yet he understood that these same forces were exacting a price. They constantly created new needs and new desires while continually multiplying expectations. Sound like us? It's us. And it's the driving force of the whole machine. Things which are positive, namely the increase of commercial activity, industry, and trade, greater opportunity, and social mobility. All of these things constantly present us with new desires, new pleasures, and new expectations. Quote, "The novelty of America lay not in the perennially restless pursuit of happiness, but in the extension of that pursuit to an entire culture on a scale hitherto unknown." Everybody can pursue happiness. This wasn't so in Europe. But in our right, we have the right to pursue happiness. And remember, we do it in an aggressive way. Okay? In light of this unending pursuit, Tocqueville concluded with this famous line. Listen to this. This is the reason for the strange melancholy often haunting inhabitants of democracies in the midst of abundance, and of that disgust with life, sometimes gripping them in calm and easy circumstances. When I was teaching my first year, 1972, college freshman, Theology 101, which they did not want to take because it was required, in the midst of all of the upheaval of the Vietnam War, in the midst of all of the civil strife of the civil rights that was percolating, and the turmoil when all of American culture was thrown into this chaos, this chaotic movement, and we wondered where it was going to come out, my students said to me, "Father, why do we have to go after the almighty dollar?" I will never forget that. 18-year-olds already saying, we're victimized by this luxury, by this abundance, by this pursuit of happiness, in putting ourselves in career tracks before we even know who we are. And then getting in the career track and keeping there until you come to a midlife crisis when you have to go back and try to figure out who you are then, and then you go to see Maureen. Listen to the sentence again. It's a powerful sentence written in 1835. This is the reason for the strange melancholy. Depression. Okay. Melancholy is different. Melancholy is a sickness of spirit. La mélancolie. Several works written on that. It's a sickness of spirit. It's something inside you where you feel like you have nothing to rely on in yourself. Often haunting inhabitants of democracies in the midst of abundance. You're surrounded. Everybody has everything and nobody's happy. And of that disgust with life sometimes gripping them in calm and easy circumstances. You know, we have the poor among the rich. We have the rich who are poor. They have everything and they have nothing. Truly, have everything, have nothing in themselves. And this is why my conference, my congregation is founded to reach out to the poorest and the most abandoned. I said the poorest that are at our doorsteps. We don't have to go to Timbuktu. We don't have to go here, there, every place else to find materially poor people. We are finding them here. And Father Bin, I hope, is going to tell you, at least to give you an example of the kind of work that he is doing in Taiwan. Tocqueville stated that there were only two things that could hold this pursuit of happiness in balance. One, he called it the doctrine of self-interest rightly understood. The doctrine of self-interest rightly understood, because we can have a doctrine of self-interest wrongly understood. And that's where one of the most critical things of our culture has to be faced. And it's one of the principles of our culture which is going to determine who you think you are. So, if we get the doctrine of self-interest rightly understood, it will contain this. Secondly, the more general spirit of religion. He always said that religion is the only force which can keep things in balance. And it's interesting to himself in his analysis of American culture that it was the mother in the home who was the seat of moral training and moral formation. The one who was handing this on to the children. Now, both of these have utilitarian implications. We can use these things only in utilitarian ways. We can use religion as utilitarian kind of control. What did you see in the Brave New World? What was the control? What was the religion? Pardon me? It was a state, but when did they get together? They got together for sing-alongs, community sings, and community solidarity. Remember that? So you're using this to give people a sense of community and holding things in check. He understood that as the light of faith grows dim, this is his quote, as the light of faith grows dim, man's range of vision grows more circumscribed. And what I have been trying to impress on you is that faith expands our vision. Faith expands our horizon. Faith gives us a fuller understanding of who we are. And it is, 5 more minutes, thank you. Yeah, and it is in the context of faith in a church, in an institution, in a people, where we really learn who we are. Because without faith, the human person turns in on himself and in on his times only. It's a very narrow world that we draw for ourselves. So let me see. I have this. There's one more quote. I must have left it off of here. I have to go back and look at my other notes, my original notes, to get the full quote here. But the point I want to focus on is that it is deeply engraved in our psyches. And remember what I told you about evangelization? How evangelization, the good news has to penetrate down through the strata. I gave you that quotation from Evangelii Nuntiandi, Evangelization of the Modern World, how you get good news into the very deep depth of the psyche of a person. This principle of the pursuit of happiness is really deep in us as Americans. The government must, according to the Constitution, protect that unalienable right to pursue happiness. It's a wonderful thing. It is a wonderful thing because it has been spread to everybody. Nowhere in the world is there any other country that has this, perhaps except England and some of the European countries, but here it's part of our Constitution that everybody has the right to pursue happiness as they understand it. But when you come to a pursuit of happiness simply as pleasure, when you come to the pursuit of happiness solely as an intellectual journey, when you come to the pursuit of happiness in seeking self-interest wrongly understood, then you end up in a society where everybody is seeking self-interest to become happy, and nobody is happy. And that's when the cloud rests on the brow. And in the midst of all of this abundance, in the midst of all of the creature comforts, in the midst of all that we have as consumers, in the midst of the abundance of wealth, people are anxious, uneasy, upset, depressed, melancholic. So I'm going to end there for this, and then we're going to come back and we're going to try to say, why? What is the biggest thief in a cultural way of life of Americans? Where do we find the thief, and how do we counter that thief? Where do we protect? How do we become guardians of who we are? Okay? Thank you. It's cold downstairs. You see, here we have an example that Maureen used yesterday when we you know, every afternoon now, the team meets to go over what we've done and what we're going to do the next day. So it's a wonderful exercise for us, because when we put these things together and we do them, we are growing so much because we work with each other. And you know, we criticize each other's. We criticize each other's presentations. We say what should have been left out, what we should enhance, and we go through. It's quite a wonderful open flow, and we're all on the same page. And it's a marvelous experience to work with people like this. I have to tell you, they're beautiful. But anyhow, she said, you know, culture is like air conditioning, and I said, what? She said, yes, the air conditioning, because I'm at home and my mother wants she says it's too cold, so we adjust the thermostat. And then I say, it's too hot, and we adjust the thermostat. And she says, and I said, no, Father Ben says, well, isn't it wonderful that you can control your environment, you can control the air, you have the possibility here in the United States. What if you were in another culture where you don't even have windows in your house, it's hot all the time, you don't have screens, the mosquitoes are coming in, and you just have to put up with it as it is in a culture. You can't change the culture. In the United States, he says, you can change your culture. And he's going to talk about this when he comes to his talk. He can't wait. He's waiting. All right. I'm not going to use your time. No. What you're going to hear from them is very rich, okay? But before I get into this, talking about the cultural thief, I just want us to think about some wonderful things in this country. What this country has. First of all, we have a large country. Geographically large, diverse geographically, which allows people to use their freedoms to go around and make their way of life and find their fortune, okay? The second thing is that fundamentally, no matter how we want to interpret the First Amendment of the Constitution, we do have freedom of religion. Not freedom from religion, but freedom of religion. This country came out of roots where people were coming to try to live their faith freely. That stays on with us. Why is it that more people attend churches and are members of various churches in this country, while in Europe you have all the churches shutting down? Okay? It's wonderful. Why is it that we had two great awakenings in this country? The call to people to come together. And those great awakenings in themselves were reactions to aberrations of the interpretations of our principles. They were also reactions to the kind of melancholy that people were beginning to experience, and the breakdown in institutions that they experienced. Okay? Thirdly, America is about freedom. There's no doubt about it. It's about freedom. Religious, political, economic freedom. America is about representative institutions and democracy. That's a mouthful in itself. America is an entrepreneurial country. It fosters creativity. It fosters enterprise. It encourages people to think outside the box. One of the greatest things in America is our ability and our capacity for self-criticism. And this goes with the checks and balances. Where in the world could you bush bash as much as here? Where in the world could people scream about Roosevelt when 90% of the population had his picture in their homes like a god? Where in the world can you criticize violation of the right of habeas corpus, the law of habeas corpus, which we are doing now? Where in the world could you have the voiceless finding voice as much as here in the United States? Can't. Self-critical and self-correcting process is continually at work. Oh, that is so important for us. America is about people. And in spite of everything else, we have generally been very fortunate with our leadership. We've had some greats. My all-time great, besides George Washington and Lincoln, is Harry Truman. Give him hell, Harry. Great man, great man. So I want to assure you that there are these good aspects. And yet, you know, it's like a worm coming into an apple or a worm coming into a palm tree. When I was in Vietnam, one of the greatest tests that I had was when they offered me a special plate that was only eaten by kings, and that was palm worms. And I loved them. They were fried, and they were very good. You had them? You had some too? Yes, they were very good. So I don't want to shock you. So then what are we up against? You know, there was this spurious thing that came out on the what do you call it? Internet, and it claimed that Jay Leno hits the nail on the head, and it was this thing about his criticism, you know, and who he was going at, and he's saying, you know, why are we so negative in this country? Why are we so negative? Is it that we have electricity and running water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Is our unhappiness the result of having air conditioning in the summer and heating in the winter? Could it be that 95.4% of these folks, unhappy folks, have a job? Maybe it's the ability to walk into a grocery store at any time and to see more food in moments than anything else than DeFore had in for the last year. Maybe it's the ability to drive from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic without having to present identification papers, or possibly the hundreds of clean, safe motels. I guess having thousands of restaurants with varying cuisine from around the world is just not good enough. Or could it be that when we wreck our car, emergency workers show up and provide services to help all, and even send a helicopter to take you to the hospital? Perhaps you are one of the 70% of Americans who owns a home, and on and on and on. And as I read this, I said, this can't be Jay Leno. This can't be Jay Leno. And it wasn't, because Cynthia went on the internet, and she started looking this up, and she says, how did... It's an urban legend, But, you know, and that's why he was trying to protect, he was trying to defend the president. Is that correct? That's what it all comes down to in here. So why then the flat-out discontentment in the minds of 69% of Americans? Well, we won't get into that. Any event, I love to do those kinds of things and then avoid the complete debate. So, but now let's look for a worm, okay, which is going to thieve us, all right? Pardon me? I don't know if you want to eat it, but you got to get rid of it anyhow, or we got to balance it off, all right? I can't do the whole thing with you here because it would take too much time. This is a whole course that I teach on faith and American culture, all right? But I'm going to give you a taste. And I'm going for what I consider to be the jugular. What I consider to be one of the points which will most delude us, most subtly distort us, and then has all kinds of fallout. And we see the fallout and we say to ourselves, why? What's going on here? We have so much good in this country. Why do we end up like this? Why do we end up, for instance, I had a conversation with some parents last night about somebody in their family, a son, and he's in the midst of a major, major, major identity crisis. Married, now separated, going to get a divorce. Very good job. All the things that surround him. And yet the frown. You know, the frown that Tocqueville talked about. I could multiply this 1,000 times with you. Especially people who have children who have come into adolescence, young adulthood, or extended adolescence, up to 30, 35 years old, and these people are unhappy and they don't know who they are. What has done it? Now keep in mind that de Tocqueville always understood self-interest as rightly understood, not as wrongly understood. What leads us to a sense of self-interest as wrongly understood? In all of my analysis that I have done, I think it all is rooted in a distorted image of the self. That image of the self, which is proposed in our Declaration of Independence and also in our Constitution, wanted to focus on what Pico della Mirandola was trying to focus on in the dignity of the human person and the capacity for making our own life and using freedom to shape our life. But there was a weakness in it. There was a weakness in it because it no longer focused on the individual. It led to individualism. Now, you all hear that word. We all hear that word. We hear it like consumerism. We hear it like narcissism. We hear individualism. And ism implies an ideology. It is a political ideology which then we impose on our way of life. So what's the major difference from what we would hold as Catholic Christians about an understanding of who we are and what a human person is? Notice the title of this: Living in Two Cultural Worlds, the Contrast of American Myth and a Catholic Worldview. Now that terminology is very important. American myth and Catholic worldview. A myth is a humanly created way of looking at the world. Joseph Campbell, yes. I can't. I'm sorry. I think it has to do, Maureen, with the way it's printed out. I'll push the autofocus as much as I can. See, I can't do it any more than that. Yeah, you'll get a copy of this stuff. Okay? You don't have to write all this down. You're going to get a copy. I just have to look at this.
But let's give a copy now so they can write while you talk. Is that all right?
I don't care.
Not what he's going to say at lunch.
I'm always told what to do anyhow, this thing. If you would see these meetings, you'd know it.
I'm sorry. I'm giving these out.
Good. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I hope that I do that sometimes. You know, make my meager attempts. You need some more over here? Now, these columns are considerably longer in what I give my class, but I'm going to take a couple of examples because I think they will help us to understand now how you have to contrast what a Catholic vision would be over against the American myth. The American myth of the way we look at the human person, God, and the world is contained in those two documents, the document of the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. And naturally, these are consensus documents. Their language has been developed to be able to incorporate a pluralistically diverse society. America was very pluralistic from its beginning because people of different races and certainly different faiths had come together and were trying to live together. In some of the early colonies, you had established churches, and in Virginia, you even had an established church. But Virginia was one of the first colonies and then states to say it would have no established religion. In other words, the government wasn't going to pay the clergy, et cetera, as they are still to this day in England. So what you have here in those documents is a search for consensus. Terminology that everybody could accept, but would have different meanings for different people. And in that terminology, there were three major traditions. One was the meaning of the biblical tradition and the understanding of the terminology. The second is the Roman Republican understanding of the terminology. And the third is the Enlightenment philosophical understanding of the terminology. I'm not going to go into those. I go into that in my class. All right? What we have coming out of that discussion, that debate, and in many cases, respectful silence, so they could come to the consensus, is an understanding which places all the emphasis on the individual. It exalts the individual. It focuses on individual rights, but at that time, always in the context of the whole. So that individual rights had to be balanced off with what you would get in the commonweal, the common good of the community. It was presumed at that time that people would nurture virtue. Virtue, personal virtue and civic virtue. And that we would take this virtue, this virtuous life, and that would hold us in balance. Naturally, virtue was rooted in religious belief, and virtue was also rooted in the Roman Republican understanding of virtue, the virtuous people. But here, when we're thinking about God, the human person, and the world, God was sort of put over there. We're not going to define too much about God. At most, God is going to be the God of the great clockworker, the great clock maker. God really put the whole thing together, but he says, here it is. Now you use reason to figure it out and make the clock keep going and keep going well. Okay? So God is over here, not getting too involved in this. Everything is in human hands. The human person, therefore, is the result of a creation, but that's not really important. And God has created each individual who is essentially individualistic. All right? If there's a society, it results because the individuals come together and they decide to make a society. Notice, the individual takes priority here. The individual freedom, creativity, effort, choices takes priority. There's much emphasis being put on self-interest. Self-interest can be either properly understood, rightly understood, or wrongly understood. Self-interest wrongly understood is selfishness. Self-interest rightfully understood is enterprise. So the individual is pre-social. Society is a result. The individual is first. Keep this in mind. I'll keep hammering at this because I want you to get this. Not only that, but the individual is self-created. You make yourself. You know the American myth about picking yourself up by your bootstraps? About finding yourself? About breaking away in order to be yourself? All of these things in our society which are so restrictive. Family is restrictive. Church is restrictive. School is restrictive. I got to get out and be myself. Okay? So that we end up with what we call the unencumbered self. We don't want any boundaries on us. We want to be able to go out there and do things the way we want to do them. The ideal self, in its absolute freedom, is unencumbered. The individual is the determiner. Oh, here's a big one now. The individual will determine for him or herself what is true and will be the seat of authority for the self. I determine what I want to do. I will determine for myself what is true and not true. You determine for yourself what is true and not true. And you know, we'll negotiate. We will contract to see that each of our needs are met in our relationship. So all relationships become, in a sense, contractual. So that we enter into, with the terms of the contract, meeting our needs, either emotional needs or material needs. Is this beginning to make sense? What has happened is we've taken a wonderful dimension of the human person and restricted the human person only to that. And analysts of American culture have concluded that this individualism has led to two types. One is what we'll call utilitarian, And it means that we will use whatever means we need in order to achieve our material goals. And the second is what they call expressionist, namely, my feelings. I have to express my feelings the way my feelings are, and my feelings are the truth for myself, and my feelings have to be tended to. Everything goes back to the individual. This does not necessarily mean, in psychological terms, that we all go through the process of individuation as the process of individuation is described by psychologists in our growth in maturity. We have to go through a process of individuation so that I know who I am. But with such focus on the individual and in an ism way, the individual remains alone. Then the individual has to be the one who's going to be responsible for determining what is true and what is good. But it is all that what is true and good are always determined and defined by what it does for me. There is one step between individualism and narcissism. One step more will lead you to a narcissistic way of life where everything goes back to me. There's one book written on narcissism by Nash. I think he's a Lash or Nash. And when you read this book on narcissism, you understand about how a whole culture can be taken up into this narcissistic way of life. Just looking at me, myself, and I, and you know what happened to Narcissus. Boom, right into the pond and drowns. You get so focused on yourself, you implode. You die. There's no alternative. This is the melancholy that we're talking about, that reigns in people's lives. This is what is inherent in the American understanding of the person. This is what predominates in the psyche. And then what you have to do is you go to look for some of the character types. Look around you who become our idols. Who become your idols? Who are put up there as models for us of what it really means to be an American? Oh, tell me something. O.J. Simpson. What? Paris Hilton. Who else? They keep talking. Yeah, but I mean, this is it's going like popcorn over here now. I mean, all these things come to your mind. What I'm trying to do here is bring you back to what we said in Evangelii Nuntiandi about the levels, the strata, where you really have to go into the psyche and you ask yourself how much this kind of a perception of a human person affects you. That's the question here. In a spirituality course, this is where spirituality really has to go. What does that perception, how does that affect you? To what extent? Related to the pursuit of freedom. These are very critical questions. Unfortunately, catechesis, homilies don't get to this. For that reason, faith is not a help. Faith has to go down and affect that level. You are here today reflecting on this and saying, oh, is this related to identity? Uh-huh. Now, I'm going to flip over to the other column, okay? The reason I'm talking about Catholic worldview as opposed to American myth is there is a distinction between revelation and myth. Revelation is not created by us. It is God's self-revelation to us as mystery. We can't create that. It is God who manifests himself to us, or herself. In words, in categories, in ritual, yes, all of the above, because all of that revelation also is mediated. But what do we believe? Because faith is a response to the revelation. Faith is the response of the mind and heart to love which is offered. What do we learn about ourselves and our identity from that extension of revelation? Really simple. God is the creator. And if God is the creator, we are the creature. I ask one question of my students in my spirituality class. And I say to them, is it enough for you to be a creature? That's a big question. It's loaded. Absolutely loaded. Ask yourself, and I referred to this yesterday, ask yourself why 12-step programs are rooted in one big admission after you figure out you have a problem. I'm not responsible for having made myself. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are those who say, hey, I'm God's creation. I'm wonderful. Created good and beautiful. Well, I've distorted it a bit, Lord, but that's all right. Beautiful. I am here. With all of my freedom, my intelligence, my will, my emotions, my senses, my body, I'm here. I am a creature. That's enough. I can handle that. That's who I am. I am. My identity. That's the basis of my dignity. You know how Catholics always talk about the dignity of the human person? And we say it so lightly. With the words, we spit the words out. And they're there. And then we go on to the next thing and we say, I'm an individual. That's where it all ends up. If God is the creator and we are the creature, God has made us for himself. And our hearts are restless until they rest in God. That's St. Augustine. All right? And why are they restless? Because we want to relate. It's constitutional. That's where our constitution is. Of our essence. We are relational. And without relationships, we die. Look at these. Where were you talking about the volunteers holding the babies? There you are. Yes, I saw that article this morning. You don't touch the baby. You don't hold the baby. You don't give them signs of love. You don't whisper in their ear. I told the family, I was giving a homily, and I lost all those kids in the church. And I said to them, I hope you go home and you hold that baby and you whisper love into their ears. You whisper it into their ears. That's where you get your identity. That's where you know you're loved. constitutional relational. You're not alone. You are primarily a person in community. That's what this is saying. You are primarily a person in community, and you do not experience your personhood except in community. Community is not a result. Community is at the beginning. It's not good for man to be alone. And now you name all these things. God is the author. That's the source of authority. Authority. God is the author of all. Human beings are stewards of the truth and the good which is communicated by God. They are not the creators of the truth and the good. They are stewards. This is the basis for a whole Catholic approach to stewardship. All of our life should be stewardship. Not this thing about getting up on Sunday and saying, now we're going to have stewardship and we expect you to tithe. Whoa. Your whole life is stewardship. Now, with this difference, notice what happens. Manifest destiny that somebody was talking about. Where are you going? I'm pursuing happiness. And we have a manifest destiny over here, and we have to enter into enterprise and seek self-interest. Rightly understood, wrongly understood. Well, it doesn't make any difference right now. Yeah, but it's so easy to slip into wrongly understood. Destiny. Unity of love through self-transcendence, here and hereafter. Here and hereafter. Unity in love through self-transcendence, not self-interest. Oh, it can be described as self-interest because it's your interest in yourself because God has made you that way, and you're not complete without the relationships of love. And that's where all our struggle is, isn't it? Learning to love. And you know what we do? We play all those games. I don't need anybody. I don't need you. You don't need me. I will love myself. Oh, that's okay. Narcissism. And yet, come closer, come closer, come closer. Have you ever been in that mode? Come close, keep away. Come close, keep away. It's one of the most human dynamics that we experience. We want to be close to people. You're getting too close. Give me my space. Huh? But it's over here because self-transcendence is a learned and experienced mode of existence. Over here, we have what I would call self-interest, wrongly understood, is the essence of the abortive mentality. Why do I say that? It's the essence of the abortive mentality simply because as long as it's satisfying me, I'm going after it. Whoa, 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 whoa. Not in my interest. And I'm using abortive in a general sense. Not just with regard to abortion. I'm using with the whole thing in life. We start going out and the plane is going to take off and the pilot says abort. And it doesn't transcend. It doesn't get off the ground to fly. It's supposed to be rooted. Remember I told you we have to have roots and we have to have wings? Okay. Those two things have to come together. The second thing we talk about is how it affects our values. The essential values of Americans are success, freedom, and justice. Success is usually material success. It can also be emotional success. Now, in order to have success, there are two high priests. In the material world, it's managers. And in the emotional world, it's therapists. Okay? So we have to seek success. We have to have a kind of a satisfying life emotionally. It's not working. We go to the therapist and we say, my emotional life is on the rocks. And the therapist usually says, what are your goals? Okay. And you have to define your goals. And we'll see how we can get there. Management, same thing. You have to have the freedom to seek this success. And justice means that everybody has to have equal opportunity to make this success. You got that? Now look here, what happens to the values language. Everybody talks about values, don't they? Everybody talks about that. And they even talk about it sometimes when we approach this question of public education in the schools. Values. We have to have values. Well, whose values? Well, we have to have values. Well, whose values? Well, I don't want those values imposed on me. I don't want your values imposed on her, blah, 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 blah. All because values are judged subjectively. Values are not rooted in what is objectively good and true. This is why we have such difficulty coming to an understanding of the common good. Is there such a thing as a common good, objectively? Or is there such a way of seeking the good in common? Tough job. Tough job, okay? The language of values is commonly used in self-contradictory precisely because it is not a language of value or moral choice. It presumes the existence of an absolutely empty, unencumbered, and improvisional self. It obscures personal reality, social reality, and particularly the moral reality that links person and society. So it almost becomes a futile kind of discussion about values. Because you throw your hands up and say, well, to each his own, that's it. Whatever you determine. Over here, we have freedom and justice. But these are rooted in faith, in hope, and in love. They are always relational. They are not just meant to protect me as the individual. They are in God, and they are relational with God, the self, and the world immediately. These are rooted in the objective good and call for commitment to the good.
No success?
Yeah, pardon me?
No success?
Success. Success is union with God. Success is union, and success is relationality in community. Success is community in peace and justice. This is the justice dimension of it. Good question. But success is always here, yes, to the extent that we are able to form community with respect and love, and also ultimately in God's love. And finally, let me look one more over here. Relationship. What does it do, relationships? Well, relationships are means to an end based on self-interest, social, and contractual. And over here, relationships are covenantal. The difference between a contract and a covenant is that the covenant is indissoluble or indissoluble. You stick with it to the end. Oh boy, that's a hook. That's a hook. To the end, yeah, yes.
Can we also say that a covenant relationship is one that you put in with care of the other person before your own?
It's love, which is at the heart of covenant. Okay? All right, let's look at some cultural thieves then. I think the biggest cultural thief is, how much? 10 minutes, I got, okay. The biggest cultural thief here is the myth of the unencumbered self. They have stolen the full perception of who we are. they have limited us to a very narrow definition of what a person is. I always make a distinction between individual and person. When I talk about person, I'm talking about the full bag, the whole bag. When I talk about the individual, in my context anyhow, with regard to the American perception of it, it is narrowly defined. What is defined is good, but it's not enough. It's going to make you be shortchanged every time. And what it does, it exalts the individual and debases the individual at the same time. Sounds like a contradiction. But that's precisely what it does. Because when you are puffed up to thinking that you are the only one in this world responsible for yourself and your world and everything that's going on in you, it's no longer enough for you to be a creature. You have just tried to make yourself God. And then you get the hubris that David and I were talking about at the break, which ends up in Mr. Skilling, in Enron. That, I would think, is probably one of the extreme examples of where this kind of individualism will lead you. The man who really thought he was going to recreate the whole economic system and revise capitalism, really. Even when he was at Harvard, I think that's where he went to school. He was already thinking in those terms. And that Enron was going to be the model of everything that was going to be new, and Exxon was going to go out of business. Tough. Tough. So it's the unencumbered self. The myth of self-creation. I don't need anybody. The myth of the self as the source of the truth. And the myth of of unencumbered freedom. This is where this can end up. Over here, we have an advocate, not a thief. And it's the Holy Spirit who is the advocate of life to the full, who will remind us of everything that Jesus has said, of what real life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness consist in, according to the gospel. You understand how we're expanding the vision here? You understand how this is meant to go down to the deepest strata of our psyche and begin to make a change? And the good news comes in and we say, wow, am I more than this? Yes, you are. And why it is, and this blows people's mind when I say it, why it is that in the church you can become a full human being and a person who is truly free. When this touches your deepest strata, you find new air and new breath. You can breathe deeply, and you are taken out of the prison or the prism of individualism and given new life. Now, what's some of the fallout of this? If we stick with the radical individualism, this is some of the cultural fallout. Anxiety, alienation, isolation, and loneliness. And Robert Bellah talks about the anxious society. The anxious class, not the upper and lower. He talks about the anxious class. And then I have a quotation here from Robert Bellah's, Habits of the Heart. Now listen to this. This one sentence is the essence, for me, of the entire book, the entire study that they did. We believe that much of the thinking about the self of educated Americans, now these are sociologists. These are sociologists, these are social scientists. They're not into religion, okay? In Berkeley, all right, I have to emphasize that. He is not accepted by his colleagues in his sociology department, but that doesn't make any difference. I mean, that means he's probably really good, all right? We believe that much of the thinking about the self of the educated Americans, thinking that has almost become hegemonic. It means dominant. It means imposing itself. In our universities, and that's where you get it most, and much of the middle class is based on, listen to the three things: inadequate social science, impoverished philosophy, and vacuous theology.
What does he mean by that, Father?
I'm glad you asked the question. He says this kind of individualism is even contrary to what we know from social sciences like sociology. It's contrary to even what de Tocqueville knew as one of the first social scientists. Sociology is about relationships of people in community and how they function. Sociologists will tell you, you can't function by yourself, isolated. It's always in community. You may think that you're over here, but that's when they stole your truth. That's when they stole your identity. Impoverished philosophy, because what they have done is taken reason out of the equation, focused solely on feelings and perceptions, and not see how reason is supposed to be the captain of the ship that takes all of our being and can direct it by a virtuous life, which is very Greek. Whether it's Socrates, whether it's Plato, whether it's Aristotle, it's the virtuous life. It's the capacity of reason and will to give direction to the person. When in reality, when you extract that from philosophy, what you have is this kind of individualistic, expressionist way of life. It's the emotions driving the life rather than the reason. It's a ship without a rudder, becomes. And vacuous theology, oh boy, that is loaded. It's spirituality without religion. Feel good and New Age. Or Scientology, for that matter. Vacuous theology. It is. How about that? That's a very powerful statement. There are truths we do not see when we adopt the language of radical individualism. And that's the truth that I'm trying to tell you on the right-hand side in that column over there. We find ourselves not independently of other people and institutions, but through them. We never get to the bottom of ourselves on our own. There is the whole key.